A midair collision yesterday, Sunday, the 31st of August, at Fort Morgan, Colorado, reminds all of us the hazards of operations at non-towered airports, high wing versus low wing aircraft in the pattern, straight in versus short approach. Let's get into it. My name's Juan Brown. This video is brought to you by all the patrons that support this channel over here on Patreon. Starting here on the Aviation Safety Network, this happened at 10:40 in the morning on Sunday the 31st of August. The Extra 300, November 333 Alpha November, and a Cessna 172, November 61657, were destroyed when they collided in midair on approach to land on runway 14 at Fort Morgan Municipal Airport, Fort Morgan, Colorado. One of the occupants on board the Extra sustained fatal injuries. The second occupant and two occupants of the Cessna survived with relatively minor injuries. So there were 4 people involved, 2 people in each aircraft, and at the time of this recording, only one fatality from one of the people on board the Extra 300. ADS-B data suggests the Skyhawk was on a straight-in approach to the runway while the Extra was on left base to final turn to the same runway. Fort Morgan is a non-tower, uncontrolled airport. And looking at this wreckage, it's amazing that 3 people survived. This is the fuselage of the Extra 300 here, and this is the Cessna 172. And if we pan back a little bit, here's the runway 14 with the wreckage coming to a rest just to the right side of the runway. This is left traffic for runway 14. Here's the Fort Morgan Municipal Airport in Colorado. 4,595 foot elevation, 5,700 feet long, and there are a couple of grass runways also available at this runway, but they were not a factor in this incident. Also at this airport, they have this RNAV GPS runway 14 instrument approach capability, which apparently the Cessna 172 was flying at the time of the accident. Being a non-towered airport, the Unicom frequency, or the CTAF, Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, is 123.05. These 2 pilots obviously were not clearly communicating with each other in the traffic pattern, or this incident would have never happened. So, were both pilots on the same frequency and talking to each other? Did one pilot have 1/2 of a digit off on this? A more common frequency is 123.00, but it looks to me like the Extra 300 flies out of here regularly. If you're doing the RNAV GPS runway 14 approach, you're going to initially be talking to Denver Center on one of these 2 frequencies before you switch over here to Unicom. And this is one of the big beefs I have about pilots doing these instrument approaches into non-tower airports, especially if they've only got one radio capability. When you're coming in on the straight-in approach off an RNAV and you're talking to the center or the local approach facility, you may not be monitoring the Unicom frequency. You may not have a heads up of what's going on in the pattern that you're about to do a straight-in approach into. It's much better if you have 2 radios that you can monitor the Unicom frequency at the same time that you're dealing with approach and get cleared off of approach, especially if it's day VFR like it was in this situation. Classic case of a mid-air collision where the weather's perfect as far as visibility goes. Get off that center frequency or approach frequency as soon as possible and get onto the Unicom frequency as soon as you can so that you can get a heads up of what's going on in the pattern. And here's the ADS-B data. Here's the 172 doing the straight-in approach to runway 14, probably that RNAV GPS approach, which may have had him on the Denver Center frequency instead of the Unicom frequency until he was quite close into the airport. And again, was he on the correct frequency, 123.05, once he switched over? Because this is a non-tower airport, we may never hear the ATC comms out of this accident. And here's the ADS-B data of the Extra 300 doing a typical short approach. These aerobatic aircraft are going to always be flying a short, tight approach into the airport for the runway that they're landing on. So this is not the 172's traffic pattern here. This is the Extra 300, and this is the base turn where the accident happened. They're closely matched in speed, about 100 knots, but the extra is going to be coming in from pattern altitude a little bit higher than the Cessna 172, coming in on the straight in a little bit lower. This is the classic high wing, low wing conflict. You've got the high wing aircraft doing a straight in approach. The high wing aircraft cannot see above his wing because of the high wing, and the low wing aircraft is coming in on a left base entry. He cannot see below his low wing. Well, in the case of the Extra 300, it's more like a shoulder wing aircraft. So there's the big blind spot right there. Now, time for a quick review of the Airman's Information Manual, Chapter 8, Airport Traffic Patterns. Standard traffic patterns are always made to the left. That's one of the only FAR regulations regarding traffic patterns. And this airport is no exception. They were all left-hand traffic to the runways at this airport. And it's this critical base leg to final where this collision occurred. Now, the aerobatic aircraft is not going to fly a rectangular pattern like this. He's going to do a 180-degree approach to landing with the power off in his acro airplane. That's just the way they're flown. While on the base leg and before turning on to final approach, the pilot should ensure there's no proximity to another aircraft already established on final approach. You've got to check right. You've got to clear to your right. You may even have to lower your wings briefly to check right before you continue in on your 180-degree close, short approach. When two or more aircraft are approaching an airport for the purpose of landing, the aircraft at the lower altitude has the right of way. In this case, the Cessna was on the 170, or on the Cessna 172 was on the straight-in approach at the lower altitude. He had the right of way. However, pilots should not take advantage of this rule to cut in front of another aircraft that is on final approach to land or to overtake that aircraft. If the turn to final would create a collision hazard, a go-around or avoidance maneuver is in order. Now, here's a classic example. Just last weekend, we're in this high-performance, low-wing aircraft coming into Independence, Oregon, and look how many times he checks right. So here he's looking for his landing spot. There's one check to the right. He's got his wings nearly level. Cross-checking, airspeed, RPM, configuration, landing spot. Cross-check. There he goes, checking right again, checking for traffic to his right. And he checks the traffic to the right for a third time. No less than 3 times he's checking traffic over his right to make sure he's not merging in with somebody on final approach, because this weekend was very busy at this little airport. And this is typical for operations at a non-towered airport. By the way, the landing worked out just fine. He did a perfect job. Here's a picture of the Extra 300 before the accident, and looking at the history of the Extra 300, I wonder if he was giving rides out there. He seems to be flying that thing pretty steadily out at that airport. So just a classic example of a mid-air collision in the traffic pattern of a non-towered airport. High wing versus low wing, short approach versus straight-in approach. Were these two pilots clearly communicating with each other on the CTAF frequency, on the correct frequency? It seems to me that somebody was not on the correct frequency or making the correct radio calls. Somebody didn't know the other aircraft was there before they rolled in on final. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.